Hi, and welcome to Dear Art Producer. I am your host, Heather Elder. Today is June 2nd, 2023, and we are joined by Liz Aviles, the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Cultural Insights at Upshot, a Chicago-based marketing agency. Identifying insights and crafting strategy at the intersection of culture and commerce, she has worked across a variety of categories, including retail, technology, food, beauty, and home. She connects brand teams with culturally driven insights that inspire creative business innovation. Driven by expansive curiosity about the world, she's passionate about identifying signals, patterns, and shifts across categories, industries, and the culture that empowers brands to grow, spur consumer desire, and prepare for the future today. I met Liz at a party hosted by Dan Goldberg in Chicago and quickly gravitated to what she was telling me. I've always said that creating personal work is the single most important thing an artist can do to stay relevant and top of mind. So I immediately saw the relevance of sharing these trends with our community. Knowing what to shoot isn't always easy, so I wanted to explore these trends with Liz because I thought understanding them could be inspiring and thought-provoking. Hello, Liz.
Hello, Heather.
I am so happy to have you on the show today. You and I met back in August when you were starting to think about these trends and put them together. And then when I first read them in January or February, I was just in awe of them. And you and I have had a couple of really great conversations about it. So I'm so happy to finally have you on the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm just, I reread them again this morning in anticipation of the show. And, I feel like every time I read them, I notice something interesting. And there are seven different trends. And while each is, fascinating, I would love to talk about a few of them today. But I think before we get into that, maybe you can just kind of talk to us first about where the idea came from for this. Where do you pull your information? How do you get it? How do you even get started?
Sure. So I would say, and I always describe the trends report, the annual trends report, as a labor of love. It started about a dozen years ago or so, and it really came organically out of the type of work that I do at Upshot as a strategist and as someone who is very fortunate to work across all of our categories at the agency. So I'm not focused on any particular category or a particular client. And in my career have really been paying attention across categories. So whether it's food or travel or beauty or home, I'm looking at what is happening across these spaces, but always through the lens of a consumer. And so in my role, I'm fortunate enough to work with a lot of great research partners. So in terms of what are the kind of tools that inform this annual perspective on the consumer across categories, I'm basically using a combination of research partners that are providing me with really excellent survey data. For instance, one of our partners is Kantar US Monitor, who's been fielding a survey of the US population since the early 1970s. So they're tracking how are consumers, American consumers, values, attitudes, and behaviors shifting. So that's very foundational to this process of putting together this trends report, but also just being basically always observing. I am a voracious reader, and as you noted in the intro, I like to think that basically what I do, and the trends report being a sort of product of that, is really a product of a curiosity about the world. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at what's happening in one category, maybe the way that consumers are behaving around their spending, for instance, on leisure, and then looking at how that might influence something else that I'm seeing in a different part of the marketplace or a different part of culture. and then creating connections. Always looking for, what does this mean? Why are people doing this differently? And how can that inform our strategies for our clients? Because consumers are always changing. We're changing our priorities.
Mhm.
So always having that sense of keeping on the pulse of culture, consumers, and the marketplace is really where the trends report came out of.
Well, I think it's so important nowadays too to kind of be a little bit ahead of it, right? Like recognizing where we're coming from, where we are now, and where we're going. And, when I read this trends report, it all seemed so obvious to me. Oh, right. We're coming out of the pandemic. We're going in this, we're all feeling this right now. And then kind of it's teed me up to think about where we might go in the future. So I found that really helpful. And I thought, what you started talking about was this idea of the mood of the moment. Can you kind of describe that a little bit? This idea of like peak nostalgia and the inspiring innovation, perma-crisis, like all of those things in the beginning part of your trends report, I thought really did a great job of kind of setting the stage.
Sure. I'm glad you brought up the future because when you do this type of work, you're not just looking at kind of what's happened. You're also thinking about it in terms of foresight. What does this mean for what's next? So when you look at what's happening now, and oftentimes it's important to look at the fringes. Like I always say, the future, you find the future in the fringes. So whether that's the fringes of culture or the fringes of the marketplace. But in terms of the moment, I believe that we're in a moment of reprioritization. So this notion of a future forward reset. So in the report, I talk about the idea that we may be reaching peak nostalgia. So anyone who's been paying attention to culture, who pays attention to brands, knows that coming out of 2020, we went into the sort of coziness of nostalgia. Nostalgia has a very cozy pull. Sociologists have studied why do cultures embrace these periods of nostalgia, and it really comes down to its emotional comfort. So in times of upheaval, in times of stress, we tend to go look to the past. It's it's a human pattern in a sense.
It's comfortable and it's familiar.
Exactly. Absolutely. And we see that with the resurgence of the 90s. I mean, that's everywhere. Brands have been into that. I reference that in the report. The fact that you have a brand like Kraft partnering with Juicy Couture, how 90s is that? But it makes sense. And I think it was something that was very smart for brands to do because it's what people needed to do. It's what we all sort of needed to do at that sort of peak moment of crisis that was the early era of the pandemic. However, we can't just stay in that space. There will always be a desire for nostalgia that's, again, it spikes, but it also then you get back to a sort of equilibrium, a sort of baseline of nostalgia in the culture. And I see the opportunity for brands is to really embrace this future forward mindset. Consumers are now 3 years out from the pandemic, ready for newness, ready for novelty. So if we just keep serving up nostalgia, we miss that opportunity to inspire them, to inspire innovation. I think people are hungry for that, for new ideas, and more importantly, for new ways of living. So what worked in the past doesn't have to work now. And I think during the pandemic, we talked a lot about what will the new normal be? When will we kind of return to the normal, to normalcy? I think the idea is break with convention, question convention. Why is it that what we did before needs to apply today? So that's that idea of really embracing that future forward mindset.
And do you think that happens right away with everyone, or do you think people kind of dip their toe in it? Because I think it's a little scary, right? Like breaking with convention, doing something different. It's exciting to think about, but do you see it as something that happens really quickly?
I think it's uneven. I think that's a great point. It doesn't happen for everyone. And you can see that. You can see that across the culture. Probably our sort of politically divisive environment is one of the best examples of that, where there's a sort of fear of change. But I think especially with younger consumers who are, when especially if we think about a generational cohort like Gen Z,
Mhm.
uh, they expect a world of inclusivity, of accessibility, of new norms, basically. And this has been the case, for a very long time, that younger generations drive change. I think what we're seeing now, though, is even more pronounced. And I think part of that is because of this kind of global reset that everyone went through. This wasn't just limited to one particular geography. This is an experience that we had as a kind of human,
Mhm.
as humans. So I think there is an energy and an appetite for change in the culture that brands and that institutions have an opportunity to tap into. Will you get pushback from people? Yes, absolutely.
I talk a lot with my artists and other people in the industry about this idea that the work that artists created before the pandemic is very different than the work they will be creating now. And I think it's because of all of that. Our mindset, where we were culturally, was very different before 2020. And we've all kind of had this collective shift and, this shared humanity, this idea. We've all gone through something together and come out in different points and with different experiences for sure. But I do think it's so important for artists to recognize that the work that is being created, whether it's by you or someone else, is going to look very different, which means it's more important than ever to create something new because your influences are there's like a line in the sand of what happened to all of us. And it's really important to kind of recognize what's happening around you and participate in it somehow.
Absolutely. And I think even if we think about art from a sort of broader perspective, we know historically that points of disruption are a catalyst for art, and it creates new ways of seeing. And that's the way that I think about it. I think that that comes down to the work that we do from a marketing perspective. That is, we now have a new sort of vision for what what our lives look like, what the world looks like, and kind of at the same time what it could look like. And I think it's impossible for that not to influence the work that artists create. And I think it's exciting.
I agree. There was such a moment, like a collective pause in the beginning. How do you create work in that environment? And I think a lot of the work that was being created from a content point of view looked the same. A lot of it was kind of user generated content kind of stuff because that you were very alone. It was with you and your iPhone, and it was not everyone was together, and you couldn't get big crews together. So I think for a long time, people didn't know what to create. And slowly they started to emerge out of it. And, their mindset was very different. So it's really exciting to see what is being created now and shared, whether it be from an individual artist or a brand.
Are you seeing that? Did you see that energy, that excitement come through in the work that you've been involved with? Just the coming back together and the ability to use all the tools at your disposal and not have those boundaries anymore.
Absolutely. I think from an actual like commissioned photo shoot or, motion shoot with a client, the idea of coming together and being on set again when that happened was amazing. Just the idea that we weren't on Zoom and, the collaboration and the energy of being together was amazing. That was you could feel that. That was a pretty powerful time.
I love
Now we use the Zoom shoots as a convenience, right? Somebody can't attend, so they'll be on Zoom. But the default is to be together. And there's this new appreciation for what you can accomplish when you can collaborate in person on a shoot.
that doesn't surprise me at all. I think we're seeing that across all aspects of our lives. I think of the first concert I went to when the world sort of opened up again. That sort of what sociologists call it collective effervescence. There,
Yes.
there is nothing like that. That experience of being together, and people are still saying that. I was in a meeting yesterday with some research partners who I hadn't seen since before the pandemic. And we all found ourselves saying the same thing. There is nothing like the energy of having a discussion like this, a really thought provoking, mind opening conversation in person.
And I think it's hard now. A lot of agencies are not in person, right? I mean, there's people who are going in 2 or 3 days of work. We're all appreciating the work from home. There's a lot of conveniences, and there's a lot of that technology has allowed us to work from home more than, being in the office. But when I get to go into an office and actually present work, as opposed to taking people out for drinks or doing some sort of Zoom show, the energy around it is so it's inspiring and it's exciting, and I can see them like dig into the work all on their own instead of watching me on a screen.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's, I think, a lot of creativity thrives on that. Not to say that creativity doesn't also require reflection and focus, and sometimes that solitary head down type of
Yes,
work. But there's so much in our industry that really thrives on that collective energy.
I agree totally. Well, let's explore some of the trends. You talk. There are 7, and I hope that all of you listening will go and read the article. I will definitely have it part of my blog, and you'll be able to link to it there. But Liz, where else can they find this?
So they can find the report on the Upshot website, which is upshot.agency. And then we have a separate, and you can link to it from the site there, but we also have a separate microsite that's at upshot-trends.com. So we've tried to make it very easy for people to discover this content.
Excellent. Well, and I'll make sure to post all of those links as well. There are 3 trends that stood out to me that I think would be really relevant for us to kind of dig into a little bit here. The first one is mindful maximalism. Can you explain what that is and maybe give us some examples of how it showed up and how it's showing up in culture?
Sure. So this is actually my favorite trend. I always have one trend that's my favorite trend every year. This one's my favorite. So this one is most centered on the changing sort of aspirations, I would say even motivations around well-being, but I think even larger than that, because in this trend, I also talk about food. I talk about everything from wellness to food, but the larger desire or broader desire for a happier, healthier life. And I think this is the one that's most sort of squarely centered on this notion of reprioritization. One of the points that I've been making with clients, with colleagues, is around this notion of Americans, of all of us. So I would say, human beings, just becoming more intentional about our energy, about our time, and that intentionality is influencing and creating a more mindful approach to, I would say, maximizing our well-being. So that's where that mindful maximalism comes from. So we want more out of our lives, but in a sense, to get that moreness, that happier, healthier life, we're determining what we need less of. So one of the things I think is really interesting, because I look at a lot of data. This isn't just hunches. I look at a lot of and very different types of data. So just this week, I was looking at some data from, of all places, the Federal Reserve of New York, where they were great resources for data. So one of the things I've been thinking about in the sense of maximalism, this moreness out of our lives, how are we using our time? So I was looking at some recent data on how many people are working from home, how many people are working hybrid schedules, and there's varying estimates of this, but I tend to go with the rigorous, economists looking at this, your researchers. And they have it pegged at about 30%, close to 30% of Americans are working what we just talked about, this hybrid schedule, right? So what are Americans doing with that time? And I would say it's a good news story. They came out with some very rigorous analysis, and it showed that people are spending more time on leisure. Like, how cool is that? We're spending more time on leisure, more time on activities related to caring for our homes, for our families. And the thing that I thought was really interesting but not surprising is that shift to using that extra time, that intentionally allocated time, is most pronounced among younger people. And so what are they doing? They're exercising more, they're socializing more. And to me, that is one of those signals. I talk a lot about signals, and that's how you make these connections and see these patterns, that people are just reprioritizing what it means to live a happier, healthier life. And when we pull that down to wellness, so, again, anyone who's paying attention to the world knows that just about every brand is promising to help you with your wellness, with your state of mind. Your bank is helping you with your wellness, as they should. Financial wellness is important. But wellness culture, and this is something I talk about in this trend, has shifted. So we are really pushing back against the kind of prescriptive version or definition of wellness. That idea that you had to like sacrifice. I say we're trading HIIT workouts, those high intensity interval training workouts, for hikes. We're prioritizing rest as part of wellness. We're also, I think, just again, looking for that equilibrium, which says, wellness shouldn't just be something that is only available through an expensive solution. Not to pick on Goop, but, this kind of pushback against Goopification of wellness, and one that's much more accessible for people.
Well, I love what you said in the report, hush the hustle.
Yes.
And encourage the benefits of strong friendships. And I'm really loving that idea, just hushing it, like, just give me a minute. Like, I need to slow down here. And slowing down doesn't mean, the high intensity workout. Slowing down might mean it's okay to sit on the couch and watch TikToks for a little while, or watch some mindless TV, or go for a walk with a friend, and that's restorative as well.
And your point, and the point about friends, I think, is a very important one. This is another big cultural tension, and that's one of the things that's how I look at these shifts. There's a big cultural tension coming out of the pandemic. So we all realized, and there's lots of, even medical data, lots of great data around this, that healthiness really depends on strong social connections.
Yeah, loneliness is a thing.
Absolutely. We know that it is one of the most important influences on aging better, is how having strong social connections, having family friend networks. And yet at the same time, we see historically high levels of loneliness. So this notion that we need to foster more opportunities for connection, create I think, mass acknowledgement that we need to see each other in the real world. We need to connect with others in order to be healthier. I think that is really bubbling up. We're already seeing some brands that are trying to encourage that, whether it's, through activations or messaging. Uh, but I think that's a really important aspect of wellness, that it transcends the notion of self-care. And I talk about this in the report, to communal care. That's that nuance.
Well, yeah, life was so easy well, I don't want to say life was easy. It was easy in the singular solitary life that we were leading, to have everything brought to us. Our groceries, our food, our work, right? We got to sit at the same desk on the same couch for months, and it all of a sudden everything came to us. We didn't have to go out anywhere to get it. So it's very easy to kind of retreat into yourself if you're not feeling very social, or you're just, it's kind of become, I don't know, a little too easy, where I find myself sometimes saying, okay, Heather, this is not the stuff you want to say no to. Like, go to this thing. Like, I know you don't want to be around a lot of people all the time, but like, just go. And then you go and you're like, oh my God, that was amazing. And I made a new friend and I did this and that was so great. So I think, we were isolated for so long, and it feels good we have to remind ourselves, like, get out there. There are benefits to this.
I like that. Actually, I love that. One of the things I've been thinking about is having that sort of say yes energy in your life.
Yeah.
Because it really is. It's easy. It's easy to
I think we trained ourselves that we couldn't. It wasn't even that we had a choice of saying yes or no. We just couldn't.
Exactly.
We have to break that cycle. Okay, how does food and beverages fit into mindful maximalism? I love that you wrote, don't fear the weird. Like, what does that mean?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So food and bev is one of my favorite aspects of culture. I always talk about food culture. One of my favorite aspects and also one of my favorite aspects of what I do at Upshot is following how people are, kind of how are people integrating or evolving, I should say, their relationship with food and bev. So I think one of the things that's interesting is that, again, and the reason why this was under the mindful maximalism headline is this idea that we're pushing back against the functionalization of food. And we're really looking to food and bev to deliver that not just emotional, but sort of sensorial experience of joy, of happiness. I think we see this in, even from a visual perspective, from a very creative and visual perspective. I love what we're seeing with the shift from almost sort of minimalist branding. You saw a lot of these new direct to consumer food and beverage brands come out, and they had that sort of millennial minimalism, which I think we're definitely, even in the past like 2 or 3 years, we're moving away from, to this notion of kind of a little weirdness, a little fun, and whether that's in just the products themselves, but also I think in the experience of food and bev. Now, I love the whole conversation around this kind of what is authentic ethnic food now. I think we're really, really questioning that, and we're welcoming more of a sort of rethinking of that, and a kind of like I cite the phrase chaos cooking, which is a trend to watch, where it's not fusion, because I think we've pushed away from that, but more a kind of blending, a modern take on what does it mean to create like Korean flavors or Mexican flavors, and I think that's a product of having all of these, what we call sort of third culture kids. I think of myself as a third culture kid. I grew up Mexican, Cuban, and American. And so you're taking all of that, you're blending that, and you're creating a kind of new chaotic alchemy out of that, which I think is part of that maximalism, that enjoyment.
I wonder if the fusion trend was one person's vision of, I'm going to take California cuisine and I'm going to marry it with, Korean or something. Who knows, right? It's like
Right.
they might not be American or Korean, but they want to fuse those two things together. This chaotic cooking, is that what you called it?
Chaos cooking, yes.
Chaos seems to be coming more from this authentic place of like, I am this person. This is who I'm made up of. And I want you to experience the excitement around it and it's just like I do. And it seems to be a bit more authentic.
I agree. I think that's where this notion of authenticity has shifted. So, I mean, if you think about it, food, and I love this, I love food history. It's just one of those things that I'm interested in, love to read about. Food is always changing. It's always evolving. It is not static. So insisting on a sort of preserved in amber notion of authenticity doesn't make sense. But I think what we're seeing today is, as you said, it's coming from new, it's coming from people who have a stake in these global food cultures, who are being inventive, who are, engaging in these, as I say in the report, these cultural mashups that deliver on something new, something fresh, something interesting. And that's what consumers, I think, are craving. Americans are craving that. We do a lot of work in the food space. And it's one of my favorite parts of culture to explore and to share with our clients.
You talk about in the report how Pantone named Viva Magenta as the color of the year. And your definition was, the color expresses our sense of emboldened individuality, a desire for fearless empowerment and courage, and a need for positivity and reinvention. I feel like that just sums up my mindful maximalism pretty well.
Absolutely. And a big aspect of the mood of the moment.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned this before, and I didn't touch on it, but at the beginning of the report, where I noted that we are kind of we're living in this sort of state of permacrisis. Every day it's some fresh new headline, something terrible happening in the world, in our feeds. I think a lot of this desire for more joy, more exuberance is a big reaction to that. And again, a huge opportunity for brands to deliver on that, for creativity to deliver on that. Mm-hmm. It's not to say that we're ignoring what's happening in the world. I think there is a very profound appetite for progress. And I think consumers are holding brands to that as well. But I think that, yes, that emboldened individuality, that desire for novelty, for immersiveness is a sort of an antidote to that.
Well, and as an artist, what an opportunity to have such a visual voice in this conversation that's happening right now. It's pretty amazing.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to another one. I really also like The Kid in All of Us. Tell us about that. And what does that mean? What is that?
That one is really interesting in that you started to see signals of this during the pandemic, where you're seeing that adults are engaging in more sort of childhood-inspired play. And there were a lot of brands who were, very smart about this in the traditional toy category. So you started seeing Lego, I think, is a great example of this. Lego has a huge business in essentially targeting adults who love their product, who love to sort of escape into that whole world. So I started seeing a lot of these signals again with these traditional toy companies seeing an opportunity to target adults. Where is this coming from? What is this a signal of? And really, that notion of the kid in all of us is in that kind of perma-crisis moment we just talked about, and the fact that we're reprioritizing our lives, things in our lives, looking at how we spend our time, how we spend our energy, and again, a more intentional way, the hush, the hustle. It is not surprising to see these manifestations in the culture where consumers, or I should say Americans, people are really embracing play in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. And this goes beyond the sort of jigsaw puzzle mania of the pandemic, the kind of board game sort of the sort of hobby of board games that's always been out there. I think what we're seeing is more sort of elevated than that, especially with some of some of the manifestations of this. And so this wasn't in the report, but just recently I spotted this and thought this was really interesting. Just this week, the Wall Street Journal had an article about how 20 somethings and 30 somethings are collecting Jellycat stuffed animals.
Oh, no.
And this isn't the first sort of reporting that I have seen on this. There is this interest, this sort of unapologetic, which is one of the things I love about it, an unapologetic interest, this desire to surround yourself with these comfortable sort of not just markers of childhood, because I think that's what's interesting is they've sort of taken it from that, and it's something that brings them joy, right? So Jellycat, there's a big trend around these tiny Japanese dolls called Sunny Angel. There was an interesting piece about this in the Times a few months ago, and how, again, 20-somethings are collecting these Sunny Angel dolls.
Look at them. I just Googled that. Okay, I recognize these.
I know. They're odd.
They're odd, but they're
odd.
very familiar. Like I 100% have seen these before.
Yes. So the thing that is interesting above and beyond just the spike in interest in, I call this out in the report, is that while there have always been people who are into collecting, kind of figurines, the Funko dolls have always been very popular. One of the nuances that we're noting is the fact that they are a conduit for connection. So I think one of the things, kind of broader cultural truth that we see right now is around the rise of micro communities. If you have a people, let's say you're a Sunny Angel enthusiast, you're going to be able to find other.
Yeah, you're going to find your people for sure.
You can find your people. You can find your microculture. It's not even no longer subcultures, it's microcultures. The world is set up to connect people. And I think that's one of the nuances in this notion of the kid in all of us. I think the fact that a lot of the folks who embrace these particular kind of, youthful microcultures, they're not just putting them on a shelf and displaying them. They are active. Many of them report that they're actively engaging with them, which again, I think is interesting and speaks to a desire for a sort of immersive escapism.
Well, and I think access to this, anything, any micro, community is so much easier than it ever has been. You might not even know that you're interested in these Sunny Angel dolls. And, it might show up on your TikTok feed and you happen to watch it. And, you watch the whole video. So now the algorithm is going to feed you more Sunny Angel things. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm going down this, rabbit hole here. And then it becomes an interest of yours. And, so I think, whereas before, I don't know, it's just the accessibility of those communities is much easier.
I love that Heather, I absolutely love that you said rabbit hole, because I've actually been using that phrase often lately to talk about the fact that people are loving the rabbit hole, right?
Yeah.
Like there is escapism in that. There's connection in that. So I think it's just funny because that's been one of my favorite phrases of late is
Oh my gosh, I'm literally down the squirrel TikTok rabbit hole right now. For some reason, it has shown up, and now there's this guy that makes this little squirrel house, and he lives there, and he has friends, and I'm like seeing all these other TikTok squirrels, and I'm just like it's mindless, but it's I don't do it all day long, obviously, but it's enjoyable, and I am appreciating that there are plenty of other people out there who are down that same rabbit hole, and it's kind of cute.
That is so cool. And when you think about something like that, and I feel like this is how my mind is always working. I ask myself, what does this mean? What is the need state that this is sort of fulfilling for people? And where is it coming from? How is it connecting? How is that connected to larger events in the world? How is that something that we can translate? Again, coming back to work with creatives and with artists. How do we bring that knowledge of this desire for this immersive escapism, this desire to explore the subculture, the microculture? I think I mentioned this in one of our early conversations. One of my favorite campaigns of the last couple of years was the recent 7-Eleven campaign, where they were expressing that notion of 11 and the kind of role of these places, these convenience stores. And there was one spot with a sort of subculture. They're all of Japanese rockabilly fans, all going into a 7-Eleven. It's beautifully shot. I forget the director. It's Harmony Korine. I can't recall. But another spot in that campaign showed these absolutely gorgeous kind of lowrider bike girls while going to 7-Eleven together. So again, here's something that's, if you think about it, okay, people are playing with Sunny Angel dolls. They're collecting jelly cats. They're engaging in micro communities. How do you make all those connections to get to what's an inspiring idea for a big brand like 7-Eleven, and how do we express that creatively? So it can seem
and how do you not take advantage of it, right?
Right. Exactly. It can seem very disconnected, but it actually isn't.
Yeah. Like yesterday, I was on TikTok, and there are these chicken wars. Now, I have no idea how early I am in finding this. This could have been a month ago, and people are like, yeah, Heather, this is old news. I was cracking up. It's basically a guy filming himself, and there's like hundreds of chickens behind him. And he's like, I'm ready, ready to rumble. I'm here. Come find me, kind of thing. It was a bit of a challenge. And then everybody else with their chickens and their birds stitched saying, I'm coming. I'm going to, it's, like they're about to have these chicken wars. And I was cracking up, and I was just like, this is the power of TikTok and the power of these communities of people who are raising chickens. And now they're all gathered together on TikTok in this way. And I thought, I really hope a brand doesn't come in and just like take this over in a way that's not authentic, because it's such a fun, beautiful, enjoyable thing that was really truly just some creative people who they were creative in their own content creation, and it was really great. So I think it's really important if you're going to create something, it has to be authentic, and you can't just, ride the coattails of someone else.
It falls flat when you do it.
It falls flat.
You see that. I see that. It certainly falls flat. I think that is an essential insight. I think it's one of the most important, almost notes to the reader for a trends report, whether it's my trends report or somebody else's trends report, is that you have to really think about, is this authentic for your brand? Does it make sense for you to be part of this community? Does it make sense for you to be part of this conversation? It's not to say that you as a brand can't have fun. I mean, if anything, that's what we're saying is, hey, be inspired by these trends, be inspired by these examples of, these manifestations out there in the culture, and put them through the filter of your brand, through your creative work.
Absolutely.
But it has to be authentic.
Well, and you and I have talked about this before. Like, as an artist, don't listen to us right now and go, "Oh, I'm going to photograph Sunny Angel dolls because they're cool right now." That's not it. I think that used to be it, right? You would be inspired by something that was happening. You would want to maybe go and photograph it, say. But I think now it's about being invited into a community. Or showing up into a community that you're already a part of. You can't just automatically assume because you're the photographer or you're the artist or you're the director that your point of view is right. You need to really kind of sit back and if you're listening to the podcast today and you're trying to be inspired, what is it about the kid in all of us or mindful maximalism or any of the other 7 trends that speaks to you and that inspires you to go and create something visually around what you're feeling or a community that you're part of or something that you can be invited into? That makes it more authentic.
I agree. I think trends are a tool to expand your vision of the world and get yourself out of your version of it. And I think creators, I think artists, I think that's a superpower of theirs. So I think they're already well equipped to do that. But again, going back to that sort of shift in the world over the past 3 years, I love what you said about being invited into a community. I think prior to 2020, we may not have thought about that so carefully. We may not have considered the nuances of that the way that we do now. And I think that's a wonderful thing. It, it's a more expansive vision of the world where we don't automatically default to centering ourselves in it.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe that's part of the disruption we talked about earlier.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I think we have time for one more trend, although I would love to talk about all 7 of them because they're all fascinating. I was thinking maybe we could talk about Wanderlust for your weekend.
Sure. So again, if you're paying attention to the world, you know that we have been engaged in a period of what some people were calling revenge travel. I mean, if you traveled last year, and I certainly did, and I'm sure you did, you experienced the sort of talk about the chaos of getting back out into the world.
Yeah.
And that desire, that sort of re-emergence, that renewed zeal for exploration doesn't seem to be abating whatsoever. I pay attention to the headlines around what the airlines are seeing in terms of business, what the hospitality industry is seeing, and we're getting out there. We're getting not just back to 2019 levels of travel, but going beyond it. So I think what's different though, as we kind of get the revenge travel behind us, which is just, I have all this pent up desire to see people, to get out there, is a shift to a more sort of restorative travel. So, and again, restorative, another one of these well-being related words. I think that's a theme. It's a theme across much of the trends report, and many of the trends touch on this, but it's certainly something that we see manifesting in the travel space. So it's the idea that all travel is, in a sense, or can be restorative in a world where we want to connect in real life. We want to spend our time more intentionally. We want to prioritize what brings us, our version of happiness. We're looking at travel as a means to that, a means to restoring ourselves, finding that equilibrium in our lives. So I think it's interesting. And again, this isn't across all travel. I'm sure there's still plenty of people who are flying to Cancun and having crazy parties. but there's also, I think, an interest in slower travel. We're also seeing, this is another one of these signals. This isn't in the report, but it's just something that I'm paying attention to because we do have some travel clients, is the rise of the solo travel and a lot of women getting out there. And again, my hypothesis is that some of that travel is spurred by this desire to restore, to slow down, take that time. So whether it's, taking some time on your sofa with some TikTok, cool, or it's maybe saying, I'm going to go explore the Pacific Northwest. One of my personal.
Well, and that's another disruption, right?
Yeah,
in the past,
exactly.
you'd be like, well, I don't have anybody to go with, so why would I go? Right?
Right.
And now you're like, you might have people to go with, but you don't need anyone to go with. And you just want to go with yourself and you want to explore on your own. Or, you've always wanted to go to this place and you're the only one who can get the vacation time. So you're going to go. You're fearless. You're the color magenta.
That is a great point. And Heather, you totally see the threads. I love it. You're such a great, what a great reader of the report.
I'm so fascinated by this.
There are so many of these threads that run through this that really kind of go back to that idea of creating a sort of sense of new norms, or dispensing with the old, with just accepted conventions, that we don't have to do that. So it's how we approach travel, to how we approach wellness. I mean, there's so much of this in the report itself, but it ladders up to that broader cultural theme of a reprioritization of a point in time, a moment in our kind of collective humanity where we have a chance to sort of upend tradition and kind of rewrite what the world looks like.
Well, and that's happening, it's so profound how much is happening in our advertising community and our, the industry right now. I think that's a conversation probably for a whole nother podcast, but I think for the people who are listening today, we're all feeling it from a work point of view. And there's so much disruption going on in our industry that, I'm trying to find ways. How do I want to show up here? How do I want to participate and be part of the future? I have so much experience in the industry that I can bring forward, and I'm excited about it. But I also am really excited about all the people who are coming up behind me have so much to teach me. So I think it's just a really exciting time in our industry, as well as kind of challenging.
I agree. So again, kind of going back to the introduction of the report, it's a moment where we do feel buffeted by crises, but it is also a moment where we can face those and look for new solutions, explore innovations, and really find a sense of optimism in what's next. And I think that's important. And kind of coming full circle, it's not just retreating into your sort of cozy, comforting nostalgia. A little bit of that is great, but really thinking with this future forward mindset and how we bring that to our creativity, to our strategy, to our work, to our art.
And I think growth comes in those places we struggle, right? And it doesn't have to be struggling in terms of a bad thing, but like wherever the tension is, or wherever it's just like it's not the everyday, it's like the disruption. And I think that's where we're going to grow.
I agree. It's a great time. I mean, we didn't even get into AI.
I know.
That's a podcast episode in and of itself. Talk about disruptions, but it's a new world. We're crafting a new world.
And do you think, again, not to completely get into AI, but here we are 6 months into the year, and the tick boom trend was where you kind of bring up AI, right? And you talked a little bit about how, tech is a bit of a mess, right?
Mhm.
and Meta with the metaverse and Twitter and all the things we thought were happening or not, and now we're so focused on AI. And I think that one of the biggest things that's really interesting to me about this trend is the speed in which it's happening now. And like I said, we're 6 months in, and it's so much farther ahead than when you first talked about the trend in January. Do you agree?
Oh, I started writing about that, I think, shortly after we met in August. I had been paying attention to it, specifically generative AI. And I had written a piece for a ad industry publication. And I think that was in November. And within a month or two, it's not that it was out of date. It was just, there was so much
Yeah.
news in the space. The biggest change, because AI has been around for a really long time, the biggest change, what is that like kind of fracture in the world, and maybe that's too negative, but because I don't think it's negative, is the fact that it has been put into everyone's hands.
Yeah.
That's the change.
One.
At once, yes.
Mhm.
That it has been opened up. So the implications for the creative community, there's all sorts of hot takes on this. They're everywhere, and there's a new one every day. There's a new platform every day. There's a new example every day. I just watched a short film that was made with a combination of Mid-Journey and now I can't think of the other platform, but it was the tool that was used for the film
Oh,
every
wow. That was a great film. Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Heather. But that is the change, is the fact that we've opened this up to people. And so it has its associated dangers, which we don't need to get into that. That's a whole other conversation. But it also empowers people. I mean, think about the way that your iPhone changed creativity, the creation of creative content. This is revolutionary. So talk about creating a new world.
No, it's exciting. It's
Yes.
terrifying and exciting all at once. And I am a big believer in two things can be true at the
Yes.
same time, right? Like it can be terrifying and it can be exciting. So rather than getting caught up in the tension of that, it's like, okay, let's just deal with them each individually and figure out, how we feel about it.
I agree. If you pay attention, if you pay attention to trends, you think about them, and then especially if you then decide that you're going to craft a narrative around them that you share with the world, you have to be comfortable with that kind of discordance, with those ambiguities.
Yeah. Yeah. And we are in a big space with a lot of ambiguity right now. But I think, listening to you talk and reading the trends report, I found a lot of comfort in finding the common threads and recognizing that it's not random. Like these things are happening in our culture for a reason. And we're collectively shifting in certain directions as a world. And it was just fascinating to pay attention to it and think about it in terms of, me being a rep and the artists that I work with, the clients that we're creating content for, the brands that we're targeting. And it really kind of helped define a few things for me. And I hope that people who are listening today will take the time to read the report and start conversations around it and go down the rabbit hole and go buy something magenta and go have dinner alone or, any of the things that try some crazy food, any of the things and recognize that it's happening around them. So it was just really fascinating to get to know you, Liz. And I really appreciated the time that you gave me.
Well, Heather, this has been delightful. I love what you do. I love I love how you saw all those threads, and it's been absolutely delightful to talk to you.
Well, you as well. And I hope that I can follow up with you at the end of the year and hear what you're thinking about for next year, because I absolutely would love to get a hold of your report for next year and have you back on as a guest.
Absolutely. And I've already started working on it. It is a constant process.
I'm sure. All right. Well, enjoy your weekend, and we will absolutely stay in touch.
Thank you.